All right, thank you so much. All right, cool. So we are having a couple of technical difficulties. Our speaker is having technical difficulties on her end. We'll definitely see how we can fix that. But how's everybody doing? Let's get a quick leadership conversation going. How's everybody doing on their end? What's going on your side of the world?
Well, this is Addie in Mobile. I'm using my phone tonight, so I hope the audio is a little bit better. I know we had some audio issues on my end the last time. It's about 9 o'clock at night where I am. So this is a late night thing for me. And let's just say it's a good thing I have my own room, because if I didn't, I would drive my mom, who lives with me, absolutely crazy. So
Wow.
But I'm doing great. I'm building a project right now that I'll speak about on my day that it's going to launch in January. So things are going really good for me right now.
Wow, that's awesome. What kind of project are you working on? How are you utilizing leadership in your project?
Oh, well, for those of you who don't know, I live with a disability, and I also run my own business. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to showcase entrepreneurship in the disability community. So basically what I'm doing is I'm connecting with established entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs that are, just getting into the game, or maybe not even started yet, but they're interested in doing that. But they also happen to live with a disability. And it's going to be pre-recorded episodes that are then launched starting in January. I actually start filming in a couple weeks. But in any case, I've already got about 3 yeses, including one from a major cookie shop chain that is out of Massachusetts. So.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's nice.
Definitely have to connect you with William right here. He's definitely one of those established entrepreneurs, and he's been mentoring us for a while already. Mentoring me for like 3 to 4 years already. You want to go ahead and say something, William?
You know what's wild is I was literally I've worked with the disability community, people with disabilities and specific challenges. When we're doing a lot of work with the nonprofit, we were doing music workshops in schools and specifically working with their students with needs. And so I've had those experiences for me have been some of the most genuine experiences. And also teaching finance. I've gone in and done presentations to small nonprofits that have adult professionals of people with needs, and teaching them about different concepts and different things like that. So I would love to be a part of be a facilitation, of any service. I think that's amazing what you're doing. Like, Constance, I want to high five you for that. That's huge.
Like I said, I'm focusing on guests that have disabilities, but any other way you want to help, I'm just really trying to showcase that disability and entrepreneurship connection.
Exactly.
Awesome.
I think that's the best opportunity that community could have, is just amazing entrepreneurs, people like you leading that ship. So however I could participate and help, I'm totally down. I'm gonna ask Angel to connect us, so we'll make it happen.
Awesome. Yeah, so our speaker, Rachel, has actually answered the chat. Very, very excited to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Richard so you can handle the introduction piece, and then we'll dive right into it. Very excited.
Yeah, it is so amazing. Yeah, and I'm so happy, guys, that this platform and all our speakers, the value that they're bringing, it has been like really useful for many of you, or maybe all of you, because even in personal, for me, it has been really, really useful. So Evolution of Leadership is like really happy and glad that, the value, as I said, it has been really useful for every one of you. So tonight, I don't want to give any spoilers, but we're going to have a high profile speaker that, which she's a founder of Leadership Companion. She also is an executive coach and a master facilitator. So I would like to introduce Ms. Rachel Bowman. Thank you so much to be here, and thank you to don't charge $1 million for your speech tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Woo!
Richard and Angel, for having me and for this introduction. I'm really excited to be here. So I want to start off with 2 questions. I guess my first question is, has anybody here ever killed an attorney? Raise your hand. No, I don't see any hands. All right. I thought somebody would join me. I'm going to get to my story in a second. Let me ask you the other question. Have any of you ever had a job just land in your lap, like perfectly suited for you that you never saw coming? Anybody? Awesome. Oh, good. So that's happened to me 3 times in my career, and I want to share a little bit about that with you tonight. Let me see. So most leaders don't leverage their authentic talents. They try to become someone else. It exhausts them and they feel like a fraud. When challenges present themselves, they don't know who they are or how to show up. Good evening, everyone. As Angel and Richard said, my name is Rachel Bowman, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here tonight. I'm looking forward to spending the next 2 hours with you. I think we're going to have a great time. And I want to share with you that I've cracked the code on how to live your authentic life as a leader. I find this topic fascinating. I really do, and I hope you find it interesting too. And I'm really grateful tonight that I see in the community David Wheatley, who has been a coach of mine since 2012. And so I'll share a little bit about that journey with him. And I see Guru, who I think is also from my coaching community with the Center for Executive Coaching. I've always dominated with my command strength. Maybe you can relate. I like to do my own thing. I don't like others telling me what to do. I like to be in charge of decisions in my life, and I like to be in charge of big things. As a young girl, others referred to me as strong-willed, like off the charts strong-willed. And my parents worked hard to help me channel this strength into something positive. But even they needed a break from me every now and then. So I found myself spending summers with my aunt and uncle on their dairy farm near Seattle, Washington. And I think at first my aunt thought she would keep me in the house with her daughters who were a bit older than me. She wanted to teach me things like cooking and sewing and needlepoint. And while I actually do love those hobbies and even sewed my wedding dress and veil, my aunt quickly decided that my personality was better suited for spending summers outside with my boy cousins. So while learning to chop wood and bale hay, I was no end of entertainment and trouble for my uncle and my boy cousins, and they quickly named me Raise Hell. And that nickname of Raise Hell stuck with me for quite a long time until I discovered the Clifton strengths and came to understand that I have one of the rarest talent themes on the list, command. And it's even rarer for a female to have that in her top 5. So some have referred to me using my command strength as bossy or a steamroller, a pit bull, sharp-elbowed, and even Raise Hell. Some have tried to cut me down and put me in a box of who they wanted me to be. And I've had to work hard to show up authentically by using this unique gift of command that I was born with. I had an unusual childhood. If you ask me how many siblings I have, I always hesitate to tell you because sometimes it varies depending on the day. You see, I have one biological sister, but that's not all I have. I also have 64 foster and adopted siblings. There are some siblings my parents never formally adopted, yet I consider them my siblings. They are orphaned, and we are the only family they have ever known. My oldest sister, Leilani, was adopted from the Philippines before I was born, and she and I are just 13 months apart, and we are the best of friends. We always have been. So growing up, I watched her be treated in ways I never thought someone should be treated. And I now know, that, of course, that label for that is racism. She has brown skin, and few others in our white school looked like her. As a result, she struggled at times to make friends. We played basketball together. She was the point guard and I was the center until our coach benched her to train and groom more junior white girls. When she went off to college, I saw her struggle even more. And I even had a friend at the time who told me that he would never talk to my sister because she's brown. And that gutted me. I hated watching her endure these horrible things. And I knew that I had a unique lens with which to see life. I have worked to use this lens to help others rise above those labels placed on them and to live authentically in their strengths, because I saw that I had a unique position going forward where I could lend myself to them and help them. So after college, I went to law school, facing opportunities to grow my command talent along the way, like being editor-in-chief of the Law Journal. When I graduated law school, I was hired by the largest litigation firm in Sacramento. I loved employment litigation and growing my wings as an attorney. I was fortunate to work for a partner, Nancy, who was the only partner of the firm, who was the only female partner of the firm at the time. And she taught me so much about working in a corporate setting. And she's not the attorney I killed. She was a true gift to me. You see, my parents never worked in corporate America. My dad immigrated, and after a few years of teaching in his mid-20s, he quit and launched his own business. This led to him starting over 24 businesses, many of which still continue to thrive. And he always had a home office and worked out of that office, which allowed him to best support my mom and our ever-changing, growing, large, small family. My mom provided care to me and my many foster and adopted siblings, many of whom had varying medical issues. So I never had that perspective of a parent going to work in the business world or working a 9-to-5 job. And as a young professional, I found in Nancy someone who saw my talents and wanted to help me refine these to be the best Rachel I could be, not the best Rachel that Nancy thought I should be. She mentored me in a way I had never seen anyone else mentor another person. She saw that my command talent was an important part of me and could be leveraged in my work. She matched my fast pace to get me trained up so that I could take my first big plaintiff's deposition in one of my cases. And that was one of my goals as a litigator, to take my first big plaintiff's deposition in an employment case. I prepared for days. I likely over-prepared because I was nervous and wanted to do a great job. And then the day came when I was going to take the deposition. I was 26 years old, still had my trim girlish figure. I'm 6 feet tall. I walked into the room and shook the hands of the plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Locke. He was a shorter, older man, about mid-50s, very overweight, and did not seem happy to be there that day. I also greeted the deponent, the plaintiff, who was an older woman. Also in the room was a court reporter, an older woman whose last name happened to be Locke, although to her relief, she was no relation to the plaintiff's attorney. At the beginning of any deposition, there are routine questions that are always asked of the deponent. So I started asking these questions, and the attorney objected to my questions and told the plaintiff not to answer them. This was not normal, and I knew that. So I had to think through, how was I going to show up that day? Everything being said in the room was being transcribed in a written record by that court reporter. The tone of the words weren't being captured, but certainly the words being said were. And I knew I needed to remain calm and keep composed while I was under attack. I paused and asked Mr. Locke what bases he was using to object to my questions. And he proceeded to tell me that I was young, I was ignorant, I was wet behind the ears. And then I took a break to gather my thoughts, and I went to my office and I searched on the computer, because in California, you can find out if somebody's a licensed attorney. And I wanted to see if he was actually a real attorney. And I found that he had just been reinstated to practice after serving a suspension for misconduct. So I returned to the deposition and started to ask more questions, only to be blocked by him. As I continued to ask what rules he was relying upon to make his objections, he continued to try to belittle me and put me in a place as a young woman. Finally, I decided I had endured enough and ended the deposition. I should add, we did call the judge and try to get through to his chambers. And unfortunately, he was on vacation, so we couldn't get immediate relief. So I had to, make the best decision that I could. And I decided I was going to end the deposition. And when I did, he threatened me and told me I would lose the case. He said no judge would side with me. No one would find me reasonable. Everyone would think I was stupid and ignorant. Of course, I was nervous, but I proceeded with my decision to end the deposition. And then I took the transcript from that day and submitted it to the judge and asked for the judge to help me. And the judge called us into his courtroom. And during our hearing, the judge told Mr. Locke that his treatment of me was the worst he had seen during his time on the bench. And then he sanctioned Mr. Locke $7,500. And as added protection, because Mr. Locke was a little bit cantankerous that day, the judge asked the U.S. Marshals to escort me to the car. He also ordered us to complete the deposition in his courtroom, which we did 3 days before Christmas. And when we went to finish the deposition, Mr. Locke started out with his usual demeanor, even telling the judge that he was full of garbage. The judge told him that he either should have brought his pocketbook or planned to spend the holidays in jail. That was sort of the message that Mr. Locke needed, because he then behaved himself so we could finish the deposition that day. After the holidays, there was a status conference with the judge and Mr. Locke on January 6th, and I had a conflict and couldn't attend, so another attorney went for me. When the attorney came back, he said to me, "Rachel, you'll never have to deal with Mr. Locke again." And I was so stunned. I asked if he had gotten disbarred, and the attorney said no. He died of a heart attack on New Year's Eve in the lobby of a health club. Wow, what a crazy twist. After that, I started getting teased by my colleagues that if you mess with me, I'll kill you. And that's how I came to kill an attorney. And that was a huge lesson for me at such a young age. I realized that everything about my future lies within me. I decide how I'm going to show up each day for each event. I decide how I'm going to react and respond to others, especially those who are trying to pull me down. And I decide who I am and where I'm going. It was a profound lesson for me to learn almost 2 decades ago. And as I've encountered other Mr. Lockes in my life who have belittled me or tried to hold me back or pull me down, I haven't always shown up as calmly and mindfully as I did that day when I was 26 years old. I'm human, just like everyone else. Yet leaning into my authentic self has opened doors that I never saw possible. I developed a passion for and expertise in employment law while working at the law firm. But billing every 6 minutes of my day became really draining, and I didn't have good work-life balance. And my husband, my poor husband, spent so much time alone at home and wondered if we were ever going to see each other. So I decided I wanted to join the federal government for a number of reasons. First, I could likely have better work-life balance working for the government, I thought. And second, if I worked for the federal government, I didn't have to take another bar exam, and I had already passed the hardest one in the nation, so I didn't want to do that over again. Third, I wanted to try my hand at in-house counsel, which government work would afford me. So I started searching for my ideal government job, and many told me that I had to cast this really wide net. However, I am a strong-willed person, leading with my command. I wanted to work in employment law and knew that if it was meant to be, God would open that door for me. So I found 2 attorney positions, and I applied for both of them, and then I was offered one. And in January 2006, I moved across the country from California to DC and started my work with the Department of Justice. Again, I wanted to be authentically me. So when my boss told me I was now in the government and I could relax and stop working after 8 hours, no matter what was on my plate, I had to evaluate whether that was who I wanted to be. And when my colleagues told me I could circumvent certain standards that I had learned as a private practice litigator, I had to decide whether I was going to join them or continue the best practices that I had developed. You can probably guess what I decided to do. I chose to be my authentic self, and I continued to pursue a standard of excellence for myself. While this didn't always garner me accolades from my attorney colleagues, it put me on the radar with executives and political appointees who knew me as someone who went above and beyond. They knew me to be a sharp attorney who prepared a thorough case record. I handled very high-level, sensitive cases that garnered a lot of publicity. As a result, I briefed executives and political appointees in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and in the Department of Justice. And one political appointee noticed my command strength and decided he wanted me to transform an underperforming Office of Equal Employment Opportunity. He sent an executive to ask me if I would be willing to move into a management position. I told that executive I didn't think that was a smart move for an attorney, and I wasn't interested. The political appointee sent another executive, and I again turned him down. The third time was not a charm either, and I turned down the third executive that he sent to ask me to move into management. And then I found this career coach. He had come to deliver training at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives where I was. And we started talking kind of about my next steps of my career and where I wanted to go. And I realized I needed to move into management, and it became kind of clear to me. And about that time, I also had another mentor who's not a coach, an executive who was a law enforcement officer. And he was really kind of pushing me hard to go in and take this position. And I did not agree with him. And I actually, in a heated exchange, hung up on him. So it wasn't my shining moment. And afterwards, after I ended up taking the job, we made up. We're still close friends, and I'm grateful for him. So I finally accepted. I went in to meet with the political appointee, and he actually leapt out of his seat and hugged me because he was so excited to have me on his management team. And that was another learning experience for me. I learned that being true to my command self and not compromising who I was, even though I had the supervisor who was telling me things, colleagues who in the counsel's office who didn't necessarily like that I didn't cut corners in certain places, that I had an opportunity that I never saw coming because I didn't compromise who I was. And I didn't even have to search it out. Leadership came to find me. And I gave myself 6 months to transform that office. I had staff across the country who didn't seem to be working. I could never find them, and I wasn't quite sure where they were. And the office was woefully out of compliance. An EEO office, you might not know, but there are statutes that we have to comply with when we do our investigations, and there's certain timelines. And we were out. So the timelines are about 180 to 365 days to do an investigation. And some of those cases were actually in the thousands of days. So those poor people had sat there for years without any investigation. So I called all my staff in. I knew what I could, within my rights as an employment attorney, I knew what I could do. And so I chose to revoke their telework agreements and gave them 6 months to turn things around. And within 3 months, we had everything in compliance with the EEO statutes. And I started looking for my next career move. I wanted to enter the executive ranks, which is the top level of the government. I applied for a job at that agency where I was, and I had a friend on the hiring panel. He pulled me aside and he told me that I would never get the position because I'm too young and I'm a woman. Now, yes, I know that is discrimination, and I had a choice to make. I also saw this as a gift because it made me take a look around that agency. I decided that wasn't an agency where I wanted to work with those executives with that mindset. So I looked for another position, and I found a posting that was written just for me. It had a blend of litigation and management and was a deputy counsel position. I applied and was selected for that position, which was in the legislative branch. And I found the legislative branch very quiet. The pace was quite slow. And in that small agency, I didn't find great leaders there that challenged me to sharpen my leadership muscles. And at times I wondered if I had made a mistake. So although I made more money, had a seemingly bigger title, I really felt stagnant in my leadership growth. I'm always curious about other people's career journeys, and I started to form a friendship with 2 leaders in the law library and had coffee with them on a regular basis. Then I was asked to conduct an investigation for the Library of Congress. I had litigated hundreds of cases that relied upon internal inspector general investigations. And I advised agents and managers on how to conduct investigations. So I knew what a good investigation looked like. And I agreed to take on this work. I didn't receive more pay for it. I worked nights and weekends for several months, getting my regular work done and then getting the extra work done. And I was praised highly for my investigation. Over the next several years, I even had agents in the Inspector General's office tell me that my report was the standard they followed to put together their own reports. It was quite a compliment. So after my report an investigation completed, the two gentlemen from the law library elevated to the top of the library. And I did what any good networker did, and I invited myself up for coffee. I had yet to be in that suite where, usually a political appointee is. And so I decided it would be kind of cool to see that suite. It was actually a natural request since we had, gone to coffee pretty regularly. And they were really gracious, and they gave me a tour of the suite. We chatted about my work as a deputy counsel. And then eventually that connection became one where these two men recognized my command strength and asked if I would fill the role of Chief Human Capital Officer. So the Chief Human Capital Officer had recently retired, and they were looking for someone to transform the organization. And I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. So that's my second job that I got that just landed in my lap. Being a change agent requires an uncompromising focus on the mission at hand to transform the organization, and I delivered that. It took me 3.5 years under extremely grueling and toxic conditions. And last summer, as I finished my transformation work, I kind of started wondering what was next for me. I was at the top of the government pay, at the top of any position where I felt like I could make a difference and wanted to be in the government. And I started reaching out to other colleagues in prominent positions in the government and who I admired. And they encouraged me to harness this time in my career and go do something amazing outside the government. I also had a dear colleague internally who had just recently come to the government. Recent for government life was last 5 years. And she was so kind to recognize that I was cut for more than the government could offer me. So I started to plan my next steps. And I think through what I truly loved about the work I had done. And I realized that I really loved helping leaders grow by leaning into their authentic talents. And I wanted to change workplaces for the better, one leader at a time. So I quit my job with the government and launched out on my own. And again, living true to myself, the third job landed in my lap. On a Monday in June, this past June, when I was wondering why the heck I was living in Chicago, and we had moved here to be closer to my husband's family, but I longed for my family in California or to be somewhere warm like the beach that was close to the beach. A woman contacted me and she told me she was recruiting for someone just like me. She needed a strong leader with command presence and coaching skills to facilitate groups of high-powered women leaders with Chief.com in their Chicago clubhouse. And I knew this is where I was meant to be. So of course I accepted. And the position is a beautiful blend of all my skills, and the flexible hours allow me to continue to build my own business. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to see if I'm really living this life. It's been a great journey of amazing blessings. And when people ask if I like being out on my own and running my own business, I often ask what they think the answer is. And they usually can recognize my command presence. They know that I like to do my own thing. They know that I like to be in charge of decisions in my life and even be in charge of big things. So these are all things I learned as a little girl. And I'm grateful my parents worked so hard to allow me to live authentically me. And I'm also grateful for every mentor and my coach that I had along the way who helped me be a better version of my authentic self. So tonight, my challenge to you is to find a great mentor. Perhaps there's someone in your life already who inspires you and could help you grow into a better version of you. If not, I know you've had a lot of amazing presenters here. Pick one that resonates with you, one who will challenge you to become a better version of you, and reach out to them. Ask them for 2 to 4 hours a month, which would allow you weekly or biweekly meetings with them. Learn from them. Grow from what they teach you. I guarantee you won't regret it. Some of you may think you've made mistakes and you're allowing those mistakes to hold you back. As I've gone through life, I've made pretty big mistakes, so many mistakes. And I remind myself that I'm allowed to make mistakes. I'm allowed to grow from those mistakes, and so are you. And I work to grow every day, and I hope you do too. And I'm allowed to change. I change every day, hopefully for the better. I'm allowed to evolve, and I evolve every day, and I hope you do too. And I work hard to hold the mirror of who I am, of who I was created to be. I see a strong woman who authentically lives in her command strength to make this world a better place. I carry this mirror of truth with me everywhere I go, and I refuse to look in a mirror being held up by anyone else that shows me otherwise. So what do you see in your mirror? If it's not your true, authentic self, it's time to find someone to help you tap into who you were created to be. Thank you for letting me share with you how living my authentic self has opened doors, allowed me to kill an attorney, and allowed me to become the leader I want to be.
Wow, that was so awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel, for that. Wow.
My pleasure.
She deserves a round of applause from everybody here. Wow. Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and open up a question and answer segment. That's all right with you?
Sure.
Awesome. So who wants to be the first person that go ahead and ask Rachel a question about her experience, either entrepreneurship or law or anything that she was talking about? Does anyone here have a question for her? Don't all come at once now. Let me see here. All right. If not, okay.
Okay. I was going to ask. Rachel, you say you run your own business along with the job, the most recent job that fell into your lap. Does your business revolve around law as well?
No. So I use my legal brain to analyze things, but I'm not a practicing attorney right now.
Did that answer your question, Addie?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. All right. I'll go ahead and ask the second question. So I'm actually very curious about your command strength.
Yeah.
How it is you built that up and how you've utilized it. I'm actually curious on, what steps did you personally take to constantly make that a really strong strength? I mean, you said it yourself, it's a very rare strength to have, and it's something that maybe a lot of people may be interested in.
So the Clifton Strengths believes that you're born with strengths, that they evolve. And by the time you hit 18, your strengths are pretty much set. So there's a 34 strengths, and you take an assessment, and then it tells you kind of what your strengths are. And then you lean into those strengths. So I have command as my number 3, achiever is my number 1, which probably doesn't come as a surprise. And I think my parents recognized at a young age that I had this kind of unique strength. And my mom, I can tell you, when I was, I think 3 or 4, we lived on Guam in a condominium, and we lived right behind a McDonald's. My dad cut a little path through the boonies to get to McDonald's. And on Saturday mornings, he and my mom wanted to sleep in. So he would, we would take money, and me and my sisters would go to McDonald's and buy breakfast. And one day I happened to take $100 bill out of his pocket, and we went to McDonald's, and I came back, and I was 4, and I counted out my dad's change. It was like $97 because McDonald's was so cheap at the time. But he was so surprised that, I had like this ability to take us all to McDonald's, not wake them up, bring back the change, had this responsibility. And then there were other times when I just kind of wanted to rule the roost at home, and my poor mom was, struggled with me, and she would call my dad at the store and say, like, come home now, because you're going to have a dead daughter on your hands. So I think as the family grew and my parents started doing foster care and the family got bigger, my mom just gave me a lot of responsibilities. So at a young age, at like starting at 9 or 10, she just made me responsible for dinner. So I would plan out, like do meal planning. She'd drop me off at the grocery store because she's super introverted. And then come and meet me at the cash register to pay. And then we'd go home, and, I'd organize everything, and I just loved it. I loved being in charge of different things. And, and I always say I'm the confused firstborn, because I'm of course firstborn by nature, but I have my adopted sister who is older than I am. And so I would often get lectured too. because my sister could do things before I could, like, Girl Scouts, you could sell, she would have to sell things. And I remember one Christmas, it's sort of Christmas time, and we were selling these napkins. And my mom like lectured me because she said, Lonnie's selling these. She needs to go to the door. She needs to talk. And I was like, okay, because I really wanted to do it and I wasn't old enough. So we went to the first house, and the lady opened the door, and my sister's like pushing me forward to talk. And I'm like, no, I'm going to get in trouble. So I didn't know what to do. And eventually I said, okay, so I gave the spiel and everything, and it was fine. I didn't get in trouble, but it was all these funny like situations where I was sort of second born in the sense that I, had this older sister doing things that I couldn't yet do, but yet I had the firstborn tendency, and she didn't have that firstborn tendency. So yeah, there was just a lot of opportunities, I think, where my parents, and at a young age, when I was 5, my dad opened his store, and he would send me down there, and I'd restock shelves for him, child labor. And I loved it. I loved, interacting with the customers. I liked being able to organize things. And so, yeah, and as I grew up, I just kind of became, developed this leadership command skill. And of course, as I've learned throughout the years too, every talent has that blind spot, and that part where we have to kind of be mindful and be careful of. And so it is something that when you have that command and that leadership presence, to temper it with, how do you develop other people, right? How do I allow other people, if I always want to take charge, what parts can I grow them and give them those opportunities too? And so I've become more aware of that, I needed to be able to develop people and develop the managers and the leaders that were around me and working for me.
Wow, that's awesome. You answered the question like very perfectly. That was awesome. And I can now say that I met someone who killed a lawyer, right? That's awesome. Cool. Anybody else have a question? Let's see here.
I have a question. If do you want me to write it down or just speak it out there, Angel?
You can go to speak it out.
Okay. Well, so Rachel, appreciate the story, and it's nice to see you again. So it's
nice to see
we
you.
have to catch up. But you talked a lot about having mentors at different points in your career, and it sounds like some of them have been people who were higher in the hierarchy, and some of them were lower in the hierarchy. What would you advise to somebody looking for mentors? What kind of things did you look out for, and how did you hook into certain people? I wonder if you've got a few thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I shared with Nancy, that was such a natural, and it was a gift. And I think it's really rare to have your supervisor be your mentor. But I really adored her, and she really poured into me. And I'm so grateful that I could have her in my life. She actually just passed away from breast cancer almost a year ago. But she was an amazing, amazing woman, super talented, and really knew how to pour into women, and knew how to help others become their best selves. So that was a unique situation, I think, at the law firm. And then when I got into government, I'm not scared of asking people for things. And that's why I encourage you all to reach out too, because people are so willing to give and to share about themselves. And so, I was just a line attorney at ATF at the time, and I started networking with assistant directors, and so 3 levels below the top, right? And meeting them through my work. And I would remember sometimes where I would be stumped in a case at my desk thinking, gosh, I need the executive perspective. What am I going to do? And I just pick up the phone and say, can I come to your office? Would you mind? And, they were always willing to help, and I could go. And then inevitably, a lot of them would have time for lunch, or they would have time to share different parts of their stories. And so I wasn't afraid, I guess, to really call on people and just ask for their help. And when I'd get in a pinch about, my workplace, like working with colleagues or different things, I could just pick up the phone and say, hey, can I come talk to you? And I even had one time, you know, an executive who said, you know, called me on the phone and said, hey, you want to go get coffee? And he had kind of noticed like maybe I was not doing so great, and I was litigating a really difficult case. And I really appreciated that, you know, we had happened to bump into each other in the building, and he just recognized that in me, and he reached out to me. And then when I got to the Congressional Research Service, and I was working with the guys in the law library, and I would just randomly ask them for coffee and just say like, hey, how are you doing? Can I get to know you? One was an attorney and a librarian, which I found fascinating. And so we would just get together for coffee every now and then, because I was kind of curious, like, why did you go to library school? Like, why did you go get that degree after you had a law degree? You know, and just trying to understand their story, which I found was really interesting. And I had no idea, you know, that they would end up at the top of the library and that that's where they would be. And then when they elevated up there, I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I remember thinking, I'm going to email them for coffee. Is that weird? And then I thought, no, it's not weird, because I would do that if they were still in their old position. So why would it be weird now? So yeah, I just have really, I think I've just really reached out to people and been honest with them, like, hey, I'm kind of struggling here. I'd like to have some advice. The difficulty I always had in the government was I had a really hard time finding good women mentors. And I really struggled for that woman perspective, and I longed greatly for it. At one point, someone tried to partner me with another executive who was a woman. She was getting close to retirement. She gave me a pep talk and then told me, you know, her only advice to me. I think I went to talk to her when I was thinking about going into that EEO position. And she just said, don't stay in that position too long. And I was like, okay. So, but then she retired, and she just said, you know, I'm kind of on a different track. And I never really bumped into another woman who I really was like, wow, I would really like to be mentored by this woman. And so I ended up with all these male mentors, and they were very gracious. And they had, you know, for the most part, of course, they empathized with me. They couldn't necessarily relate to the things I was going through, because sometimes I felt like, you know, some of my leadership struggles were because I was a woman, and they couldn't always give that to me. So, yeah, but I think if you just pick up the phone, like, people are so eager to help. So I really encourage you to do that, and find people who like really do inspire you and who are above you. So, you know, think through, I guess one of the thought processes I had is like, I want somebody to be the iron sharpening me. And so who is that person? Who's going to challenge me and encourage me to be somebody better and encourage me to do something different? And like the mentor I hung up on, right? He kept encouraging me, like, the step into management. You need that step into management, Rachel. And I kept saying, no, you're not an attorney. You're just an agent. You're just a federal agent. You don't understand what it's like to be an attorney. But he was right, because it doesn't matter if you're an attorney or an agent. You need to step into management if you want to keep going up. And so people who are willing to wrestle with you and deal with you kind of in that hard space, and allow you to like have all those questions, allow you to, you know, sort through like who you are, and, you know, confide in them. Like, my command strength, if I felt like I ran over somebody that day, and I could go to them and say, okay, now how do I back up? Because I don't lead with empathy, and I'm gifted with other talents. And my husband thankfully has empathy. And sometimes I can bounce ideas off of them, because I'm like, okay, I messed up. Now, how do I go back? How do I, get the empathy? How do I have that nice conversation? And then now I find, because I lead with my top 5 really are execution. And so I don't have the big picture strategy sometimes. And especially as a solopreneur, I have this great group of 7 coaches that we have a mastermind group, and we just pick each other's brains and we bounce ideas off of. So I kind of I recognize where I'm thin, where I need to, bulk up in those talents or those areas, and pick those people who can help me in that area.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, that was a great question, David. Great question. I think that's definitely a lot of value there, especially with mentorship.
Let me add to that, actually, because I'll tell you a little bit more about David. So David came into my organization to do training. He wasn't coming in as a coach. He came in to do training in September 2012, and he did this training, and it was to the council's office. And I really loved what he had to say, because I was like, wow, he's like speaking leadership language. And it was kind of creating leadership as a habit. And if you've never looked at his stuff, you should. So he has, once a week, you focus on one thing. And it just became kind of broke down leadership into very doable actions. And he offered 3 webinars after that. And I remember being on some of those with either just myself or maybe one other attorney. And I was like, why isn't anybody taking advantage of this? It's like, in my mind, it was free, right? And so that's kind of how I glommed on to David. I was like, okay, this guy talks a language that I like, and I know it's skills I need to build. I know that was an area where I was thin, and I needed to bulk up that muscle. And so I wanted to find that person that would help me to, beef up my leadership skills. And so that's why I clung to David. And I just over the years, I just keep, call him, text him, he'd come into town, we'd have lunch. And so that's like, look at yourself, and maybe you don't know your exact blind spots. Maybe there are people you trust that could tell you, and really find those people that will help you kind of refine those blind spots, but also build those other parts that you really want to build. And you've had all of us need to continue growing as leaders, and you've had really great leadership presenters. So find one of them, have them help you and challenge you in the way that is meaningful to you.
Wow, awesome. Do you have a question, Alexis? I think your mic, you turn off your mic.
Yeah, it's a lot of interesting points that are made. I've been listening on to, like, authenticity. I think that's something that's really important. I was just wondering, like, from your perspective, Rachel, how does it feel to have that as one of the most important aspects to functioning as a leader? Like, I feel like I'm kind of like that too. Like, I don't like to be not congruent with how I operate. And I think the empathy portion, is also something I have to work on. But just having that as like the forefront of, I think, because like from, correct me if I'm wrong, you really do value that, like actually operating from your authentic self. How have you kind of protected that over the time? Yeah.
That's a good and a hard question for me. So I think when I'm working in a healthy environment, in a healthy workplace, I have protected it really well, because those workplaces have valued that authentic self. And so I could show up truly as who I was, and I didn't have to hide anything, and I could be me. And then I've worked in workplaces that were really toxic, right? And had people kind of what I felt like beating me down on a daily basis. And that can get really difficult. And when you want to show up as your authentic self, they're saying, no, we don't want you to be that person. Be like us. And I don't, and that was really hard. And I think we're all caught in that sometimes. And sometimes we do make mistakes when we're in those environments, and we maybe aren't the best. We don't show up our best selves. So I would say, if you're caught in that environment, try to find a way that you can still keep yourself authentic and keep yourself, be true to yourself. Like when I was in the counsel's office and I had to weigh whether I was going to blend in with what my boss was telling me and what my colleagues were telling me, and I just didn't want to do that. And so I found other people who valued my authentic self, and I could be authentic with them. And I knew I just was going to have a few strong boundaries with some of the other people. And I think sometimes, and I didn't do this so mindfully, and I've come to appreciate the value of this, is really finding organizations that do speak the same language that you're speaking, finding that fit, right? That's what they call it. Like, is it a good fit? Does it fit with your values? And that's something that I've totally come to see is so important. And of course, in the government, it is kind of hard to move around and find that. But there's, tons of other places to work where they do value that. And I've met a lot of amazing leaders in my work now, and they're all working really hard to create those places. I really value Brene Brown in her work, and she talks about courage, and she talks about, living authentically. And there's just some leaders that I've come across that I've worked with, that they don't value that as much as just, bearing down and getting the work done. And sometimes it's at the expense of the employees, and it's sad. So I would encourage you to kind of search out those, really study who you are, and then try and find those places. And if you find yourself in a place where it's not maybe a healthy workplace where you can be your authentic self, evaluate whether there's another way you can develop that while you're still there, or develop a way to get out and move on to another place.
So that's really interesting, and I kind of have a follow-up question for that. Mostly because when it comes to that, I think seeking out mentorship and really being able to share, I would say, like the harder portions of your growth, right? I was just wondering, how do you kind of know who you're able to kind of connect with, who you're able to kind of share mistakes that you kind of have a harder time sharing? What kind of methods would you recommend when it comes to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how do you seek out a good mentor, and how do you know if it's a safe space to talk to them? So usually I go in gradually, because I like to build that trust and like to see, is this somebody that I can trust? And so if we have coffee and I tell them something, and then I wait a little while, does it come back to me? Does it get out? Or I know, I start to meet people in their friend circle or in their colleague circle, and what do they talk about them? And so there's some who, I would meet and I'd think, oh, this is a good person to trust. We'd maybe have lunch. I wouldn't necessarily say anything. And then, I'd hear, oh, I went to lunch with Rachel and this is what I said. And then I would be like, okay, that's not a safe space, right? And generally, I think I would say, like, Nancy was really an unusual situation. So I would say I didn't seek out mentors that were in my direct working group. So in my direct office, it was always outside of that. Pick a mentor where, it's not somebody who's going to be talking to your colleagues, who's going to be talking to your supervisor. It's somebody who's removed from that, and hopefully up a few levels where you can go and say, okay, how do I navigate through this? And I think there's some there's a vulnerability on your side, but also there's some things that it's okay. I mean, if I told them like I messed up and I did this, if that got out, I mean, it wouldn't be horrible because it's the truth, and I'm seeking them out for help, right? And I want them to help me. And so being open and honest and vulnerable with them, I'm not telling them my deepest, darkest secrets. It's not a therapy session, but it's being honest. Like, I have this weak spot, and if somebody betrays me and goes and says, "Hey, Rachel has this weak spot," yeah, I mean, we all have weak spots, right? And I'm trying to get some help to leverage that and to build on that. I haven't had anybody betray me like that, so that's kind of hard. And I think partly because my intuition is pretty good about those things, like who I could be vulnerable with. But I think there's, you can test the waters as you get to know people and just see, like, is this somebody that's kind of safe? Is this somebody who is going to keep confidences? And tell them, when you go into that, hey, I'm struggling and I'm looking for a safe place to talk. Is this a safe place? I do joke sometimes that attorneys are like the worst for confidentiality. And I've, bumped into that here and there. And certainly that isn't a fun thing to experience. But on the other hand, I kind of think sometimes, like, if it happens, it happens. Like, then I have to do sort of damage control. I learn my lesson and I move forward. I don't know. Can't say like, here's the 5 things to tell you, like when you're seeking out that mentor, to say, are they trustworthy? Sometimes it's just being vulnerable with them and then listening what the chatter is after that. And then, being willing to speak more. I'm trying to think back to some of the mentors I had when I first got into government and how those happened. And usually they were through my work, like through litigation, and then just getting to know them as people. And then being able, like, they start being vulnerable with me too, open, like, about, if I ask them about their leadership journey. And that's maybe a way that I started without even thinking about it. Is, asking them and seeing how open they are with you, and maybe even asking that question, like, do you have a big regret? And just see if they're willing to be vulnerable, because you don't want somebody that's not going to be vulnerable either. So test that out and see if they're, willing to tell you anything, and if they're open to sharing with you, because you want that authenticity too.
Got it. Wow. Wow, thank you so much for that. There were 2 hands that went up. VD was next, and then after that, William for the questions. Awesome. So, VD, do you have your question ready?
Yeah.
All right, awesome.
So first of all, Rachel, I appreciate you for sharing your story. Personally, I know it's hard to tell your story, especially if it's moments when it's sentimental. But if anything, my question would be, how would someone keep their authenticity? My bad. How wouldn't you keep your authenticity without offending anyone? Yeah, if anything, I'll explain myself of how my character is, so you can have a better perspective of it. So I've always been described as a shy girl, but to the ones that know me fully well, they know my parents know me as a strong charactered girl, in which I'm persistent, I'm hardworking. I'm not as smart, but I'm quick to I'm not as quick to learn, but um, I'm persistent when it comes to setting my mind to whatever it is that I want to accomplish.
And so, is it that people are ridiculing you for being shy? I'm not quite sure. What is the ridicule that you're receiving?
Yeah. So many times personally, I don't know how to use my strong character, and at times my shyness kind of stumbles with my character as well. So I struggle with that sometimes, but yeah. What would you advise?
So I always have two camps. I have the people who I respect and that want to have input from, and then people who I don't necessarily respect their input. So if they're the people who you respect and you value their input and you're trying to be your authentic self and they're giving you feedback to say, hey, the way that you're showing up maybe is hurting me, or I think you could be better in this area, then I would extend a listening ear and say, okay, like what do I need to do? How can I be better? And that's where you have that discussion of, can you hold me accountable to that? Like, I'm going to take these steps and I really want to work hard toward it. And I want you to be gracious with me as I grow. Then there's the other people who are there to be kind of the naysayers in your life and to maybe tear you down. And they don't see the value that you bring. And so they're saying things that are hurting you. And they aren't there to support you. They aren't there for your best interests. They aren't there for Viri to be your best authentic self. And they don't see the value in that, and they don't want you to be. And so those people, I say, tune out, put strong boundaries, and don't let them be there. And don't let them hold that mirror up, right? So many people in our lives, and I think that that's the really hard part, is there's so many people who are like, hey, Viri, here's all the problems, here's all your mistakes, here's who you really are. And you're like, no, this is the mirror. This is me. This is my authentic self. And I am trying to live this authentic self, right? And I desperately want to. And yet I make mistakes. I'm human. Like we all are. And that's part of growing. And so I encourage you to keep holding up that mirror of who you truly want to be. And then when somebody says that isn't you, and you're not showing up like your authentic self, who are they? Are they the people who are in your camp or not? And that's where you then have to evaluate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up, we got William with this question.
Amazing. Can you hear me?
I think so.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. First, I want to thank you for participating and sharing your life experience. I love your story. It had my heart racing with just the transformation in which you were facing, the adversity, and just you could see your heart. I really do thank you and applaud you for making the decisions that you made to overcome those phases. So it's amazing. My first question is kind of focusing on team leadership. Because you mentioned that you were in a couple different leadership positions, some in the government, and you said you have a team of like 7 coaches, if I'm not mistaken, or you have a team of coaches that you work with. How has your command strength played a role in the navigating the team during hard times or team conflict or team doubt? And is it different when it comes down to the leadership role you were given compared to the leadership role that you're creating?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my command strength when I am leading a team is different than my command strength when I am influencing others. And so that's sort of the leadership shift, right? And when we're leading a team, sometimes we have to exercise that authoritative side, where we start being directive and have to order people to do things. And other times we don't have that authority over people. And so we have to learn how to influence them and be able to be influential in my command. And so that's where I have to pivot, every now and then, between command as a leader in an organization and then command on my own. And as a leader in an organization, and when you're called upon to transform a place, transformational work and change agent work is not for the faint of heart, and you are called to go in and clean up. And so that is a huge command strength where, you're leading the group, you're trying to get them to embrace this vision, and it looks scary to them. And so when I was in HR and I was, had to study every single person to figure out who in that 60-person organization had the right skill sets, were they in the right places, did they need to, be moved on to someplace else? It was scary for them because I was coming around looking at everybody's work, looking at everything. And at the same time, you have to have that vision, right? You're setting that vision, you're charting the way forward and getting everybody on board. And that vision of change and transformation, some people don't like it. And so you're always going to have the people who are fighting you. What I find to be really helpful when I'm in those situations, because I'm such a driven achiever command person, is finding the leaders who have the kind of balance me out and have what I call the cheerleader. So they are really engaging. They're really good at talking with the staff and being that convincing self. While I am really good at the planning and getting the stuff done and, charting the way forward, but they're rallying the troops. And if you can get one of those people or find who they are on your staff and get them to rally the troops, it can be even easier, because if you can win them onto your side and then have them kind of rallying the troops for you, and they get the message and they're preaching to their peers. So that's the most ideal way when I've been leading a team, is to really leverage that personality. That's, I don't know if you're familiar with the DISC assessment, but it's and I always call it the party planner. It's much better than that. But they're really gifted at just like encouraging everybody and getting everybody on this like hyped up plane and saying like, let's go, let's get this all going. And they have that voice and they can cheer people on, where I am kind of this more steady, driven, focused person. And so that's always a good balance. And I've looked for that. And I've been fortunate to have those people work alongside me in my positions when I've been in leadership. And then now, of course, I'm a solopreneur out on my own. And I have been given this gift of other coaches who are also out on their own, and that we have this great little group that we have, and we meet once a week and we, throw around ideas. I have a bad day, I have a bad incident, I can call them and I feel like I'm walking down the hall and kicking my feet up in their office and having a discussion with them. So it's really cool because I still have that camaraderie that I loved about being in a workplace, that I wouldn't necessarily have if I, was truly out on my own without anybody around me. But we're all growing our own businesses. We're all talking about coaching. We coach each other sometimes just to keep our skills up, or, I have something I'm going to do this next Wednesday because I have this new thing I want to test out, a coaching module. And so they're going to be my guinea pigs. So it was just kind of a gift. I'm one person that I don't like it when we say, hey, let's meet for coffee. And everybody's like, oh yeah, great idea. But nobody ever does anything about it. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to put it on the calendar. And then I'll invite all those people that said it was a great idea and just get it going. And so I can get things going, and then it became really easy. And so we've been meeting since May. Every week we meet. Yeah. But I had that too. I just want to say one more thing. I had that too when I was in one of my positions. I was new to the agency and I went through this training, and there was 4 of us at the table. And I kind of liked everybody at the table. I didn't know them really well, but I said, hey, would you guys want to get together once a month for lunch? And they said, yeah. And so I put it, I populated on everybody's calendar, told them where we would meet, and we would just brown bag it in the cafeteria. But it ended up being this really great network because we told each other things from different parts of the organization, and we were all from different parts, and it was just really helpful. So I just think like sticking your neck out sometimes and being like, hey, you want to go to coffee, and, you know, just make it a regular date. If you really like the first time that you went to coffee with them and you had good conversation, then make it a regular thing. Just offer to set it up. Like, hey, you know, and you don't have to pay. You just bring your own lunch or buy your own coffee. But it just becomes kind of a regular thing. And then that friendship and that mentoring kind of grows from there.
That's amazing, amazing. Thank you, thank you. And
Mm-hmm.
second question, what do you personally practice to continue your personal development and your professional development? Like, is it like reading? Do you go to like conferences? Are you always in courses? Are you going for more training? How do you feed you?
So I think probably the best thing I can tell you that's free is the John Maxwell Minute every morning, the weekdays, and he sends it out. So sometimes it gets a little bit long, but usually they're like 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, and he gives you a word. And I just really love that because it's simple, and he tells you, you know, what your word is going to be. And you just like think about it throughout the day, right? Today, I think was a really boring word. I think he said it was going to be boring, and I think it was focus. But you know, like you like listen to his little video, and then you might get something out of it. If you don't go back to the day before, because maybe you got something out of the day before, but that is something that's like, I think really an easy, inexpensive way. And it's short, like it just takes a minute or two. And I like those short things. I do believe in continuing education, and I do it all the time. I'm learning all kinds of things. I read, I get different newsletters. I unsubscribe because sometimes I don't like them. Then I resubscribe because I'm like, oh, I miss them, you know? So I'm kind of inconsistent in that way. Although I would say I'm always trying to read and always trying to read something and learning. So I'm always growing, but the consistent thing from day to day is that. The other one is James Clear, Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but he makes it really easy. And he talks about like breaking habits down into really small, minute chunks. So don't try and take on something huge, but take on something small. And that's, you know, David had to go. I know he's East Coast time, but it's one for every day, one for every week of the year. And if you just read one of those and you just apply it, and I think that that's way better than trying to read like 1,000 books and trying to cram that knowledge. I find that the practical application is so much more important. And so if you find nuggets here or there, plan them into your day. Like, when are you going to apply that? When are you going to remember that? And sometimes I put a tickler at lunch where I'm trying to just be mindful and remind myself, what was the word for today? What was I supposed to be thinking about? So I set up kind of those reminders, and it seems silly, but it does help you kind of focus and work at it.
Amazing. And what about, like, for example, maybe on the high end side, like, hey, I want to pay for something, or there's this coach training, or one of the mentors or one of the speakers has this training, and I want to, and it's this amount of money, and I might want to attend it. What am I looking for to really make sure I receive value from something like that?
Yeah, so that's, what I do is I use Google and I've done this actually for a number of my courses that I've taken for coaching and different things, is I Google and I find people that I'm like, oh, this person sounds interesting and they have this certification or they've taken this training. And then I call them up and I say, you know, how was that training? What was it like? Was it valuable? Like, what was the best thing you got out of it? So the John Maxwell one, that's a good example for me. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do that. And so I started looking, you know, who could I reach out to, try to find information. And I finally found this guy. He's a speaker and he's in Pittsburgh, I believe. And I just called him. I emailed him and said, hey, do you have time to chat? And he's like, sure. So we talked for about an hour. He told me the pros and cons of it. And you know, I had to think through like what it was that I wanted out of it. And, you know, I asked him questions about that. And then he pointed me to somebody else and I could talk to that person. So sometimes when I first start down the road, I ask like the first person I talk to, do you have anybody else? Do you have two people? And if you ask specifically, just always ask for two people. So do you have two people? And then they point you to the next two people. And then you talk to the next two people. And if you feel like you have your answer, that's great. If not, ask for two more people. And you keep like kind of building your network that way, but you also keep building, like the information that you're getting. So I talked to him, he gave me really great input, and I talked to two more people, and I decided I was going to do it. And I decided I really only wanted to focus on the speaker side. And so I did all the speaker courses. I was supposed to go to Florida at the end of March before COVID hit and get certified. And then Maxwell, when you go in person, will certify you as a speaker coach and trainer. And then COVID hit and I couldn't go. And I had done all the speaker modules. I really loved them. I didn't do the coaching modules because I was doing something else. And so I actually, reached out to them and asked them for my money back because I said I wasn't going to be able to get certified. And they said, actually, you can go online and do it. And I said, oh, all right. So then they sent me all the modules to take, and it ended up being the best coaching modules I could have taken because they really, it complemented the other coaching certifications that I have, but it taught me the why behind coaching and why it works. And it was super helpful. And it also helped me with understanding and coaching through the imposter syndrome and that internal saboteur, you know, that little voice that tells you all the bad things. Like, how do you coach somebody through that? It really helped. And so I am so grateful like that I completed that after, you know, only doing the speaking, then thinking I was going to have my money back, and then actually going through it. It was the best coaching training I could have taken. But I always, you know, especially for high ticket things, just Google, you can find a lot of people, or look on LinkedIn to see who has those certifications or who has gone to those trainings, and then start picking their brains. And just because they put it on their LinkedIn profile doesn't mean that they think it gave them, you know, great bang for their buck, right?
Right.
When I
They're
was
just
picking,
utilizing it for that appeal.
yeah. And
Right.
I did that with the coaching schools, and there were so many. So I just started going through, and, you know, there's one school that people were like, yeah, I kept hearing from people, I went there. It's so unprofessional. And I was like, okay, that's not what I'm going to do. But it was interesting because as you start talking to people, you get the real story, even though they have it on their LinkedIn profile. You can kind of evaluate, okay, they thought it was unprofessional, but what really was the problem with it? And you can explore it, because sometimes just because it wasn't fit for them doesn't necessarily mean it's not fit for you. And so just being able to ask those questions.
And so you didn't limit yourself when they said, hey, you know, we have this online. You were like, oh, okay. Like, you were more open to it, or like, because in the beginning you said, I'm only going to do the speaking. And what made you open to taking on the other coaching? Just because it was that easy and accessible?
Partly because it was easy and accessible, but also because when they showed me which modules, and I said, okay, the one that I would really want to do next is coaching. So let me just look at the first part of it. And I started down that road, and I was like, yeah, this is really good.
Okay.
So
like
that
you tasted the water, and you know, that's part of my appetite.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was really well done.
That's amazing. That's amazing. No, thank you very, very much. I
You're welcome.
appreciate your answers and your knowledge. Thanks.
Sure. You're welcome.
Awesome. So I think most of the people here are college students, either not yet on their 20s or early 20s. So I have a question in regards to that. What do you recommend for someone who is in their early 20s? What steps should they be doing to better themselves, whether it's their personal leader or just their professional life in general?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. So I think looking at your habits and really looking at what your habits look like. And sometimes that's hard because we've kind of gotten ingrained in these habits, and saying, okay, are these habits that I need to break, or are these habits that are going to get me somewhere? So it's kind of two things, your goals and your habits. And when you're looking at and then also look at your goals, like where do you want to go? What do you want to do with your life? You know, is there something that you really aspire to? If you don't know, find that out, like start picking brains. I remember in college, I talked to hundreds of people in career fields, right, about their careers, the informational interview, truly doing informational interviews, just picking brains, trying to sort out what I wanted to do, where I was going to go. I did the same thing in law school when I didn't know, you know, where I wanted to be. And I just started talking to people. I talked to people who were litigators. I talked to people who were in-house. I talked to people who, you know, I like to gather in that way the information that I need. So I just talked to a lot of people and tried to figure out where I wanted to go. And then I have the goal. I'm a very goal-driven person, and I know not everybody is, but I like to have that goal. So where's my long-term goal? Put the stake in the ground, and then trying to work toward that. And then usually you're working toward that through your habits. And so it's, you know, taking small chunks. What am I going to do this month? What am I going to do the next month? And how am I going to get there? And if it's studying for the LSAT, then it's planning out, you know, how you're going to study for the LSAT. It's sort of like I ran the Marine Corps Marathon, and it's sort of like planning out that, right? Your training schedule. So you set the goal, I'm going to run it, and it's in October, and it's the last Sunday in October. And then I'm going to make my, you know, back it up. How long do I need to train? And then make your training plan. So if you want to, you know, set your career goal, here's where I want to be. Here's where I want to be next year in 12 months, and then start making your plan. How are you going to get there? You need to dust off your resume. You need to dust off your interview skills. Maybe you're already up on them. Maybe you're not getting what you need from the applications that you have. Do you need to, you know, talk to somebody about how you're showing up in interviews, what you're saying, how you're communicating what you bring to the table, how, you know, what your skills are. I've been actually working through with a lot of clients that very subject because they're wanting to pivot from a certain industry into another industry, or the government to the private sector, and helping them just make that communicate. How are they communicating that they're valued, what value they bring, and that value they can bring from where they were to the private sector. So I think it's both goals and habits, just looking at, don't be stagnant, but always be growing and working towards something. And maybe your economics are in a situation where you can't make that decision right now to go to, you know, graduate school, or you're just getting to the point of finishing college. And what's your next step? And always have that on the horizon, so that you have that in mind and you're always, you know, working toward it.
Wow, that is awesome. Nice. Goals and habits. That's two big words for sure.
Yeah, those are things that resonate with me. I know that they don't always resonate with people. And I think sometimes when I start talking about goals, people think that they have these problems that they need to solve. And what it really is making a goal to overcome that problem or overcome that issue. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily resonate, but when you stop to look at it, if you're having this, you know, crisis moment, it's usually trying to get organized around that goal, and then making the game plan. And sometimes that can organize your thoughts.
Wow, that's very, very awesome. Did anyone else have a question? I see Richard put his mic on, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. So for example, Miss Bowman, I heard when you said that somehow you got, you know, like not a rejection because you were a woman. So what is your best advice for people that were facing these kind of problems, that no matter the situation, they have, you know, their high levels of enthusiasm, and random people just come and be like, you know what, you don't have the physical characteristics, so I don't think that you fit in here. And we clearly see these, you know, on society. So what is your best advice, you know, for these kind of transitions? Because even though I can empathize with that situation, that, you know, I was having my levels of enthusiasm, and it was, you know, people telling me, you know what, you don't have these certain characteristics, talking about, you know, like physical ones.
Mhm.
So, and I want to emphasize that didn't stop me, but my levels of enthusiasm were a little lower, so I was keep moving still in everything, but it was hard. So what is your best advice, for these kind of situations?
Yeah, that's a great question, Richard. And I'm sorry that has happened to you. It is really
Thank you.
difficult. And I, I think you have to weigh what you want to do and what route you want to go, right? Having been a litigator, litigating employment cases, I've seen what that looks like. And I've seen, I think the emotional toll that it takes on people, no matter what, even when they win, I've seen, they can walk away, and it's so long that sometimes it doesn't feel like a win, and it can be really hard. So and thankfully there are people who do endure that for us, right? That they go through and they make they litigate for years, and these profound decisions come out because that changes the course for us, and I'm really grateful for that. But I have chosen to just step away. I think sometimes I feel like there's another calling for me, and that door is closing, and I'm being walked out, if you will, of a situation because I have a bigger, brighter future over here. And so I have to trust that, and I keep going. And that just comes from within and from my faith. And I believe, that in a higher calling, I believe that God, walks me out of situations, and he has a better place for me to be. And sometimes those places have been really toxic. And so the freedom that I get is really beautiful. And it's like, wow, I didn't even see that. I had this big title and this big job, and I was miserable. I was miserable in what should have been this beautiful office, but it was really a prison. And I was so thankful when I could walk out of there and be free from that. So I can't really tell you, because I think you have to figure that out for yourself. Are you somebody who really wants to make that change through the litigation and have a landmark, potentially have that landmark case, and you want to go through that? That I wouldn't say that that's wrong. I would say that that is definitely a choice that you can make. It's just not one that I made, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong for you. And I think that there are very legitimate times to do that and to rise up and say, I'm going to take this on for the greater good of everybody, because this is so, so horrible. Very rarely does it end up being, I think, a big case like that. And usually it does end up just, being you against the big person. And so you have to, I don't want to say the bigger person. As in the big person, I mean the big entity, right? And so you just have to weigh, like, is this where I really want to be? Is this where I want to spend the money and my time for the next several years, entrenched in that litigation? And I've seen people, with their marriages and, their marriages fall apart, going through it. And it's really hard. And so you have to have really a strong constitution to go through that and to see it through. And I think when you're faced with it, evaluating whether that's a workplace you want to be in, what your options are. Is it that you can find a new place? Is it that you got passed over at the entry level, right? And so if you can't even get your foot in the door, what other options do you have? So it's looking at all the options, because could you, file an easy complaint where maybe you put it on the radar of the company, because maybe they don't know. Maybe this is just the hiring manager and they need to be aware of that. So I wouldn't necessarily close your door right away. Look at all the options. What are all the options that you have, and explore all of those, and then come to a conclusion. I like to gather as much information as possible before I'm making those decisions. And for me, when I was passed over because I was too young and I was a woman, I ran the EEO office. So I knew my rights. I knew what I could do. I knew where things would go. So I didn't feel like I needed to explore that with anybody. but I would encourage you to talk to somebody, like truly, if you feel, that you have been discriminated against, you should talk to an attorney, get some, another voice in there just to give you a gut check. Because maybe down the road I don't want to live with the regret of, man, I wish I had known that then, right? So explore that possibility so that you can make that best decision in that moment in time for you, and then decide where you want to go. And I think sometimes you have to admit that, if it's really tearing you down and really affecting you, you might have to get help, and that's okay. It's okay to go and, seek treatment somewhere. I've had to do it. I've had to get intensive therapy at different, at a time when I had a similar situation happen to me. And I watched, I've watched my sister go through it. So I think you have to evaluate yourself and where your headspace is so that you can be your healthiest self. And I've talked to people who have been in that toxic environment too, and feel like they are, I think the hardest part, Richard, too, is that you can't always, you know it because you feel it, right? But you can't like pin it to the wall because they're not that blatant. Usually they're very subtle. So when you say like, you're discriminating against me, no, I'm not. And so it becomes this really difficult thing to try and prove, and it becomes really hard. And that's where you have to evaluate, because sometimes then you start thinking, am I making this up? And then you start self-doubting yourself when it's actually happening. And so you have to sometimes lean on your tribe, lean on those people that really can speak the truth into you and help build you back up, and evaluate what the best course of action is. And then make the best decision for yourself and decide, one, do you stick it out there, or do you need to get out? I have a friend who went through a really difficult time too. And he said, I can't heal until I'm out of here. And so I have to get out of here, and I have to sever ties really quickly. I can't pursue litigation because I know I'm not going to heal. So he just wanted to get better and heal and move on. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's the way that I approach it, is gather as much information, know your options, and then make the best decision for yourself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it was good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you said that even though that people were not trusting you for that fact as a woman, you will continue forward, right?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
I mean, that wasn't going to deter me. I knew if I wasn't going to be working there, I was still going to go after the job somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So if you aspire to be COO somewhere and somebody says, Richard, your skin is brown, I'm not going to hire you, you keep going. That's not the right company. I mean, you can decide whether you're going to litigate that case, but that doesn't take off who you are and what your goal is, right? You just look for a new place and you keep going.
That's nice. I admire you. That's really great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So hopefully my question was not the last one. Anybody else?
Remember, this is time for you to invest into yourself. That's questions about, personal development, leadership, questions about Rachel Bowman's story,
Yeah, it's no wrong or bad questions in here. We want, a result, and it will be helpful for everyone, and for the person that is asking, of course.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, if not, I definitely do have a question.
I'll jump in. Oh,
perfect.
Dang. Go ahead, bro.
Okay. So, I was just wondering if you had one thing that, sometimes it changes, but recently, have you ever had like one thing that you just wish people knew that's pragmatic and would help them in the long term of their life? It's kind of just something in the forefront of your mind. And maybe you have a couple, but I'm kind of curious on that.
Common sense.
I
used to always say that at work. I used to say, like, I think people left their common sense outside the building. Like, what happened? But I think sometimes we we become like such creatures of habit that we don't step back and think, oh my gosh, this habit is so stupid. Like it's making us do dumb things. And, you know, and sometimes we get so, I think our relationships, maybe somebody's annoying us or bothering us, and then we react a certain way and we forget to stop. And we just don't bring that common sense of, okay, let's be an adult and let's figure this out. But yeah, I used to always say, like, what happened to common sense? Like, just bring it with you to work, please. Don't leave it outside.
That's very interesting because I know this one businessman that when he talks to his team, like his expectations, he'll joke around, but it's true. It's like, okay, you know, my expectations is that you do everything that's listed within the course of your position, and then everything else that that you can see that needs to be corrected. And you know, he kind of go a little bit pretty strong into it. He'd go explains like, you know, if you can't handle that, I mean, then it's he would go strong, but it is something that, you know, his team is kind of about. So it's interesting how you kind of bring that into actually like when it comes to actually working. It's pretty cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I always tell people, like, just use common sense. Like that we don't, you know, I think sometimes we get wrapped up in that technical skills and where we start to think like we should be thinking so much higher, but it's like, just think common sense. Like this is not rocket science. We just need to use our common sense here. So
I think Angel had a question.
I like that, Addie.
Yeah, I totally agree with Addie too. It's so funny. Yeah, I had a question. So when you were working in the EOO, I want to. I'm curious. What were your first steps to change it around? You know, you got there. You must have been met with so much opposition, some support, some opposition. You know, I don't understand. I don't know the dynamic because I didn't go through it. But yeah, what were some first steps that you decided to take during that shift?
Mm-hmm. So in the EEO office, when I first got in there, you're right. There was a lot of opposition because, of course, you know, staff don't like to see transition coming. I think sometimes they want it because, of course, it can be a positive, but it's also scary, right? Change is scary. And so so the first thing I did was kind of put my ear to the ground and just listened and tried to hear what I could hear. Any chatter, any, you know, what was coming through the emails. At the same time, I started looking at the cases and the statistics and trying to see who was doing what. So one of the things I do, and I did this also when I was in HR, is I get the roster of each person and then their position description, what they should be doing. And I start looking at what are they doing and start just keeping notes to myself. And you know, when I step into those roles, sometimes people are like, oh, external people who are really frustrated with the office will start coming and making their complaints about different people because suddenly they know that you're in there to make the change. And I always take that with a grain of salt because I, you know, have to be very mindful that there are some vocal naysayers about things. But I'll just make a note of it and just try and see if I can figure this out for myself. And so I just study each person, study the processes, study the workload, study what's kind of going on. And within the first couple of weeks of being in the EEO office, I realized like there was nothing getting done because I had the case statistics and things should have been moving from one phase of the investigation to the next, and they weren't, and I wasn't getting anything. And, you know, and so then it's time to start asking questions and figuring out who's doing what. And that's when I quickly realized, like, I don't think any work is getting done. And so, I called everybody in and then took away their telework agreements, which motivated them to start getting work done. And I thought that they, you know, we would need 6 months. They did it in 3 because they were real motivated to get those agreements back. But out of that, I really ended up with fantastic managers. And so I was able to really, pour into them and help them build skills. And one eventually promoted into the deputy position. And so that was really cool because she hadn't been invested in before. I saw, her potential. I saw her rise to the occasion. I saw her be able to do that. And so that was a really gratifying experience to be able to help her get to where she wanted to go in her career too. And she hadn't ever had a supervisor who worked with her to do that. And so she was grateful. I'm actually still close friends with her to this day. And that we met, when was that? Like 8-9 years ago. I actually met when I first came to the government. I met her. So that was 14 years ago. And then we worked together. So that was really cool. And then when I stepped into HR, I again studied everybody. I quickly learned actually that there were some staff who should know how to use Word as a critical part of their job, and they couldn't do it at all. And some of them tried to pull the wool over my eyes and thought that I wouldn't be able to notice it. But I actually walked with one of them back to her desk and asked her to find the document for me. And she didn't have it on her computer because she didn't create it, even though that was part of her job. So, it was finding out certain things about people. And again, I was able to find out like where the gems are. There were these hidden gems of people who had been siloed into a position and they really longed to broaden their skills, and some longed to go into management. And so I worked with them to get those skills that they longed to have, and they had the potential to do it. And so being able to, give them those opportunities where they could grow their skills. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and copious notes, because that was one thing, as I had my spreadsheet of everybody and just started taking those notes and figuring out who was in the right places. And then at a time when I sort of got everybody kind of, the people who needed to move on, I moved them out and then hired new people and fresh faces. And then we could have this conversation about, okay, now if you had a dream, like where would you want to be? Because I think that's where people thrive, right? Where we can like fill where they want to be and where the agency has that skill set and we can tap into that. So that was really cool, and being able to, move people around and put them in places where they could thrive.
Wow, that is so awesome. Wow, you definitely had different steps for different things, I see. And then you did I think you were really into like analyzing everything first, just to make sure you read everything correctly. Wow, that's awesome. I see we have another question here from Jose Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
First of all, thank you, Rachel, for taking the time to talk to us today and the organizers of this event. I wanted to ask you, what is your best way to deal with coworkers that are constantly trying to bring you down or benefit from your failure in the workplace? Because I still haven't had my first full job out of college. I have had some internships, and I've encountered other co-interns and workers who really they're not looking for the best in you, in your results. They want to essentially benefit from your failure. So how do you deal with that?
So when you say benefit from your failure, do you mean like they're talking negatively about mistakes you've made, or you mean something else?
Well, for example, if they are trying to do better and you constantly or try to ask you, or what are you working on now, just to get an idea of how they can get ahead of you, or if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. So they're trying to compete with you and trying to one up you. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that I walk my own path, and that the doors that open to me are going to open because of who I am and not because of somebody else. And so and that's part of living authentically me. And so and let me add one more part to that is my number one is achiever. My number one talent is achiever. And that means that I actually compete against myself. And I think a lot of people misconstrue that as competing with them because they see me doing all these things to try and make myself better. And they think it's at the expense of them, and it's not. And so I try to tune that out, just like I said to Viri, it's picking like who's trying to compete with me, and are they wanting to do it because they want to better themselves, or are they wanting to do it because they want to, tear me down? And so I have to be mindful of that. I think my thing is kindness and truth. Truth is kind. And so having that, do they have a need to know? Is there a need for them to have that information? And being honest with them. Like, I don't know that I need to share that information with you. Could you let me know why I need to share it, or what you need that information for? Sometimes it's just asking questions. Put them, start asking them questions. Ask them to explain what they need to know. Ask them for more context. What part of their job is impacted by this, so that you can then know whether you need to give them information. I like to be collaborative, and I like to share with others. I like to share things that make lives easier. I like to share the, things that make things better, but I also like to share my standards. And that isn't always welcome. And I've had, Jose, I've had the hard line of, everybody wanted to be Facebook friends at one place I worked. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have them nosing in my personal life all the time while we were also at work. I was clear about that. It made me unpopular, but it was my decision. And I decided like that was how it was going to be. And I'm not in that workplace anymore. I don't talk to many of them. And it was the right decision. I just saw how that could be misused. And so I really didn't want to do that. So I think it's okay to also say, let me think about this, and then come back after you've had a chance to think about your boundary. And is it a healthy boundary? Is there a boundary there that you need to put up? So like the Facebook thing, if you get a friend request from somebody that you work with and you think it just feels funny, take a moment and think about it. Is this a standard I want to have forever? Is this a standard that I want to have with this person? And then be honest about it. And you can't control their feelings. You can't control how they take it. You can control how you deliver it, and being kind in that delivery, and being honest, and being bound by your boundaries, and towing that line.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also wanted to ask you, because you were talking about when creating relationships with mentors, to just like reach out and ask to go out and get some coffee. But so I've had professors that have really I really look up to, and let's say it was a few semesters ago, and I just wonder what would you recommend in order to reach out and try to maybe see if I can create that relationship with them, even though I was their student. And I don't know, I personally, I'm very introverted, so I hesitate to ask a professor let's go get coffee, or a previous professor, or just can I pass by and maybe we can talk about I don't know, my future. I don't know. What do you recommend?
So I would come up with 3 to 5 questions that you would want to ask them. And I do this with almost every meeting I have, because I value their time, and I want to make sure that, that I get the answers that I want, but also I'm respectful of their time. And generally speaking, it ends up being longer because they're very gracious, and we might end up talking about family stuff. You know, there's other things that come up, but that's a start. So there's something that I was thinking when you were talking about that. Oh, so I actually just I think in March, had a professor that I had in my first year of college reached out to me, and we started communicating. And so that was, gosh, 25 years ago. So I always say this, Jose, like, people are so gracious. And I think especially professors, they do want to help you. They have your interests at heart. So think about it. What is it that that you really would want to know from them? Do you want to know more about the academic part? Do you want to know their advice on your career choice? You want some input about that? Do you maybe want to leverage them for a networking? Like, sometimes a really good thing about professors is that they've had so many students, and you go to them and say, hey, I really loved your class. I loved that you invested in your students in this way. I really felt like you cared about us. And I'm thinking about becoming an attorney. And I know you must have, students who went through. I'm just curious if you have stayed in contact with any that you would be willing to put me in touch with. Because I'm really curious just to get to know them and to kind of understand their career paths. And they will be super happy to dig in their Rolodex or iPhone, I guess now, and give you those contacts and say, yeah, I'd be happy to put you in contact with them. So think about what your request is, and you don't have to limit yourself to that request. I would definitely say have a few questions. And one of them could be, how did you end up in this professor, position? Did you always know you wanted to do that? Did you do other things? Did you explore other things? Do you regret it? Because sometimes they'll say, yeah, I'm stuck here now. I got tenured, and why would I leave? Right. So there's all these questions you could ask. And I think the best thing that I always think about, and I don't say this, I guess I don't really verbalize it, but I'm really curious. And I like to just be curious. So you're like, those professors really struck a chord with you, and you're curious, right? And so what are you curious about, and where could they maybe help you? And leverage that curiosity at the beginning, and then say, and now could I make this request of you to put me in contact with somebody? Or could you be a recommendation for me? Could you write a recommendation? I've had, they're so gracious, and they'll take the time to write those for you. And they've probably, some of them have written hundreds of them. So they already have the template already done. They just need certain information. I remember I think for law school, I had to have 3 recommendations, and it was like, who do I go to? It just seemed like a daunting task. And then when I stepped back, I was like, oh, they probably do this a lot, actually, when I thought about it, because there are a lot of people going on to grad school or, going into professions who use an academic advisor or somebody from their school to give them a recommendation. So I would say get curious, go ahead and prepare those questions, and think about what you really want to learn about them, and then go learn. And you know what? If you forget to ask like your questions, it's okay. Like, just get to know them. Truly just, spend time getting to know them, and then go back to them and say, oh, shoot, I forgot to ask you these questions. Would you mind if we had another call? I wouldn't schedule it right away, but, and always thank them. Always. And I always try to do a handwritten note. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes I do it by email, but within 24 hours, I always send something. I think that really does set you apart. Even the interviews, I am always shocked, even more recently when I would be doing interviews and people wouldn't send thank yous. I think it just sets you apart now, because if you're willing to do that, they will remember.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Great questions, guys. Thank you, Rachel. We are going to use the last 5 minutes to talk about what is to come ahead with evolution of leadership. I think there was just so much great interaction, and yeah, you're welcome to stick around for the last 5 minutes. We're not going to ask anybody to stay here longer than 9 o'clock. We want to be respectful of our time. Yeah, Angel, do you have any input as well?
Yeah,
I'm gonna
definitely.
head out. So thank you. Thanks for having me. This is a great group, and I'm happy to answer more questions or help you out in any way going forward.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You want to put your contact in the chat just in case anybody
Oh.
wants to message you. Any last questions?
Yep, I will for sure.
Awesome.
Have a good night, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel, for
All right.
this amazing opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Good night.
Awesome. If there's anything I can do to help in the future, do let me know, and I'll go ahead and attend or something.
Great. Thanks, Angel. Thank you all. Good night.
We fully appreciate it. Thank you.